Welcome to Public Safety Talk Radio, the podcast for all of our heroes in public safety, including law enforcement professionals, firefighters, EMTs, corrections officers, healthcare workers, and more. The show is produced by the POCUA and is founded upon its Soundness Initiative. This episode is sponsored by the Finest Service Organization, a provider of line-of-duty death loan protection through many of our POCUA institutions. I am Ken Bader, your host for Public Safety Talk Radio, and I have an infinitely fun guest. I went across the so-called pond to find this guest, and she is what I would call a podcasting superhero with at least 3 true crime podcasts that I know of that are awesome. Her name is Sarah Ferris, and she is the host and producer of Clueless, The Long Con, Stop the Killing, Conning the Con, and also a non-true crime podcast, which I have an affinity for, called The Guilty Greenie, which maybe we'll get to, maybe we won't, we'll see. But Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thank you. That was such a warm welcome. Very nice to be here.
I try. You know, I try to welcome my guests. I don't like to make them feel, like they're already on the spot. You know, you would know about that doing 72 podcasts, or what is it that you're doing?
I know. I swear to God, I think I might need a podcast intervention. I've got another one brewing in me at the moment as well. So it's just finding the time to do them. But whenever there's a good story, just gotta get there.
You gotta grab it. Well, speaking of good stories, I had the pleasure of listening to at least 3 of your podcasts.
You're a super fan. If you've listened to all 3 of them, that is super fan status. Committed. I love it. Thanks very much.
Podcast Magazine makes me listen to a lot of podcasts. Go figure.
So forced to.
Yeah, but most, if not all of them, are good. But yeah, I had the opportunity to cover Clueless, The Long Con, and I'm really interested in Stop the Killing. Yeah, I think that, one of the questions in you doing a number of true crime podcasts, have you learned anything about crime prevention? Have you learned anything about staying away from con men or staying out of active shooter situations? What have you learned?
I've learned so much, and I think that's the actual reason that I started the podcasts in the first place. Because, I mean, if we go back to the beginning of why I did the very first podcast, which was Conning the Con, it was because my little sister had found herself swiping right on a serial con man, and just unpicking that, because in all of my 40-odd years, I hadn't come across a con man or been really involved in any real crime. So for me, general public, number one, it was very much how does this happen? How does my intelligent sister become the victim of a con? And that's exactly what we unpick in all of the podcasts. They've all got a purpose, and it is basically me just trying to protect myself so I don't get conned. Or in the case of Stop the Killing, it's really coming at it from that community perspective of, and I'm a mum, how can we be safe? We've got a responsibility as members of the community, but I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm very, very lucky that my co-host on that is one of the world experts in preventing mass shootings. So yeah, it's all about learning. I can't even tell you the number of things that I've learned, but I'm sure you're going to make me think of some.
Well, we have time, so
Okay.
But you know what? We'll circle back to that possibly. Yeah, I always, I've never been to the United Kingdom. I always think that everybody's so polite over here. Even with crime. Here, they say, "Give me your effing money." Over there, I'm thinking they're probably saying, "Cheerio, I'm taking your money today." Is that what it's like?
Generally, the people that are saying "cheerio" are getting their money taken from them, I would suggest, Ken. No, and I'm not going to do a really bad impersonation of anyone over here, because it'll be a career limiting accent, that's for sure. But generally it's a lovely place to live, let's just say. I mean, I'm originally from New Zealand, so again, love places to live.
Exactly. I've never been to New Zealand either. I would think that crime would be polite there too. Hashtag sarcasm there. But let's dig a little bit more. The main topic that I really want to cover for our audience is your work on the Stop the Killing podcast, because I know our law enforcement
Mm.
listeners would love nothing more than to prevent, more mass shootings going forward. If they could press a button and not have any mass shootings, that would be, perfect for them. So talk to me a little bit more about Stop the Killing, as well as, your expert podcast host with you, Catherine Schweit. What are some of the suggestions to prevent mass shootings before they even happen?
Yeah, well, to go back to who my co-podcaster is, Catherine Schweit is the former head of the FBI's active shooter program. And after the Sandy Hook school massacre in 2012, she was tasked by the White House to put together the first ever research into mass shootings and, whether or not they were actually increasing, or was it just media hype. So she put together this study that was 100, I think it was 160 active shooter cases, broke it down, and really that is her jam. She knows that stuff inside and out. She's really is an expert in it. Now, I came to that party as a outsider to the US, looking in, having met Catherine by stalking her on Twitter and having some conversations and saying, listen, can we have a conversation about, what the hell is going on in America? Is the solution just get rid of the bloody guns? Because that's what everyone outside America is thinking. 3 seasons in, I'm now a lot brighter. I've come along a long way on my understanding of how complicated that solution is. And it really, what I've come away with learning from Catherine is it's really a lot of puzzle pieces that will help in preventing mass shooting. So it's not just one simple thing, but definitely, and we are very much just give you the facts on the podcast. We're not political. We come at it with, trying to answer those big questions. Are all guns bad? We have episodes on that. We look at the research. Is it mental health? Is it mental illness? Or mass shooters, kids sitting in a basement? We look at the research that she's done and try and break that down and just come up with helpful ways that we can be the eyes and ears to watch and see a person that might be on a pathway to violence. And that's the real key, because what I have learned is there's points along the way before the trigger is in the hands of these horrific, humans that are intent on doing evil, that we can, as a community, spot them, see the leakage, spot the signs of telegraphing that information. So, yeah, that's probably one of the key things that I've learned.
Yeah, it's great comments there. I truly believe that you stalked Catherine Schweit because she went to the best university in the world, DePaul, out of Chicago.
Well, did she go to DePaul, or she teaches at DePaul? I don't know that she went to DePaul.
Oh, if she has a degree there or teaches there, if she has a direct connection to DePaul University in Chicago, Illinois, she's got to be, one of the top level thinkers.
Well, I'm really sensing some bias here. Correct me if I'm wrong. Are you going to break out into one of those American things where you go Greens or something like that?
Go Blue Demons. Let's see if I could find my 2 degrees from there somewhere in the closet that I haven't put up on the wall yet. But getting back in a serious mode where I don't like to stay too often.
Neither do I.
being in America, and being an American, living here all my life, there's kind of 2 sides of that story. There's the anti-gun folks, and then there's the mentally ill. We need to create some solutions to that. It's my estimation that, I think, in my opinion, that the laws that are out there are there to protect the mentally ill more so than the folks that may be the victims of this mental illness. We can go into evil and so forth, but yeah, as you mentioned, there are clear signs, and I think we're starting to pick up on that. From your podcast, Stop the Killing, in the data, what are some of those signs, some of those steps that you see out there looking back at some of the past mass shootings, and what are some of the things that we can learn from that to try and prevent those?
I mean, there's so many little, you go back to any story of a mass shooting, and there's always the neighbor, as Catherine would say, that says, oh, he was a bit hinky, he was a bit off. There's always just something that's always after the fact. And I think the real hurdle in getting those pieces of information to law enforcement is that people only get a tiny piece of the puzzle. Mm-hmm. And in isolation, you might not be the one that picks up the phone because, that guy's just looked at me a bit sideways, or he's, I saw him looking at a gun website over his shoulder at university, or what, all those little pieces of information don't make sense as a whole. But, and there's one example that was in our very first episode we did on the Sandy Hook massacre, and Catherine gave me a little test at the end of the bit we do on the
Did you pass?
Profile. We never use the shooters' names in ours. Sorry?
Did you pass the test?
Pass? No, I failed. No, of course not. Of course not. And I'll show you how badly I failed, Ken, actually, because the test was, would I have reported anything that she had talked about? And I said, well, no, I don't think I would have. And she goes, well, one of the examples that she'd given to me was the neighbor had seen that the shooter's bedroom had been, like, the window had been covered with paper or darkened for several months before the shooting. And she said, well, would you not have thought to report that? And I said, no, Catherine, actually, I wouldn't have thought to report that because, that's my neighbor. It's just one thing. I wouldn't think it was my place. But what I've learned along the way is that is above my pay grade to know whether or not that is a useful piece of information. If I can get that piece of information to the police, it might be the last piece of the puzzle that they need to just go knock on the door of a welfare check. And, most of the time, these people aren't necessarily going to be mass shooters. It might be somebody that's like signaling some suicide and, ideation or something along those lines. So it's just about looking out and being caring for people around you. And I do think that's the biggest barrier, is to feel the confidence to report to the right people. And that's something we bang home every week on the podcast.
Yeah, that is an excellent point, and one that aligns well with something that I've heard from several people in law enforcement, whether it be FBI, local police, sheriffs, whatever. And it goes along with that, whole theme of see something, say something. And even on a base level, I've been at some community meetings led by police commanders, and they've always said, that people after the fact say, well, I thought something was weird, but either out of politeness or apathy or what have you, they didn't report it. And I remember one police commander saying, if you really, really just instinctually feel that something is a little off, you have my permission to call 911, even if you don't think it's an emergency. And he said, if it's our job to ascertain the level of a threat. If you call us and you find something suspicious, and we go and we find everything's okay, we're not going to be upset. We're going to be happy. We're doing our job. Everything's okay. Okay, it's all in a day's work. But nothing is more frustrating than a family coming back from a vacation, having their complete house basically ransacked with everything of value taken out, and them talking to neighbors like, yeah, I saw this guy I never saw before walking with John's big screen TV out to a van, and I thought that was strange, but, I really didn't think much of it afterwards.
Now a word from one of the POCUA's proud business partners, OfficerPrivacy.com. OfficerPrivacy.com was founded by Pete James, a law enforcement professional with over 25 years of experience. Pete wanted to find a way to help law enforcement officers protect themselves and their families. So he formed a team to create a way to quickly identify and remove their information from certain sites. OfficerPrivacy.com is the result. This service is already offered through a select few of our POCUA organizations. As a listener of Public Safety Talk Radio, you can take advantage of a special offer from OfficerPrivacy.com. Go to OfficerPrivacy.com/POCUA, and when you sign up, you'll get 2 additional bonuses. In addition to removing your personal information from the top 30 people search sites, they will give you your first 2 months of monitoring free. This is a value of $39.98. In addition to that, you'll receive a cell phone privacy device, a $19.99 value. This prevents data from leaving your cell phone when you use public charging stations and is a must when traveling. So go to officerprivacy.com/POCUA today to take advantage of this offer and to protect your privacy. Organizations who are members of the POCUA and are interested in offering the service directly to their members, contact us at POCUA@btcinc.org.
I know. And, like you've hit the nail on the head. I think what it is, and we've just had an episode on this just recently. Catherine and I had a conversation on it. The people that you think as a person in the community that will be closest to this potential shooter, for example, the family members, the best friends, the aunties and uncles, those people are the circle just outside. They're not the ones that are in normally to report for, we call it the hesitation ring of people, because if they pick up the phone to really think about what the impact is for a child, or people on the outside of that situation have the expectation will report the leakage because they are the closest person to see it. They might be seeing, for example, that this shooter might be a child of theirs, that they are buying ammunition, there's packages being delivered to the house, there's doors being locked in the house, all of those things. You think, okay, well, they're in the perfect position to report that. But the reality is that those people are far more invested in not reporting that. They will find every other solution rather than reporting it to the authorities. And that's when it becomes, the neighbor, the teacher, the acquaintance, the friend of a friend that needs to pick up the phone. And it all comes down to that information of, I can't say often enough, it's above our pay grade to know if you've got that icky feeling in your stomach that something's not right, but it doesn't make sense. Don't run through, okay, what am I reporting? Or what could that mean? You don't know what it means, but you've got a little piece of the puzzle. Hand it to someone who might be able to put it together. And there's only 2 outcomes. One, it's nothing happens. There's in terms of there's what's the police knock on the door. That's them doing their job, like you say. They're not going to say, "Oh my God, you wasted our time." Or 2, you stop something that is absolutely horrendous. So sliding door situation, just pick up the phone.
Yeah, completely agreed. And I think that there's a lot of talk here in the U.S. and obviously you have the anti-gun folks, which I am not a part of. My opinion, my choice. I think that we need to have some better laws to protect the tax-paying citizens here, but that's a whole different discussion. But and I do realize that the mentally ill, everybody has rights. We don't want to take those rights away. We walk a slippery slope when we start doing that, but there are basic, whether you want to call them laws or actions, that we could use to our advantage. And you said it perfectly, that welfare check, that is something that we could use. And you don't know, maybe you see somebody with blacked out windows all of a sudden, maybe that is truly nothing. But maybe there's been 5, 6, 7 different reports on this person, And that's the last piece where it says, okay, well, somebody's called this in. We can do a welfare check. We have it within our rights. We can't just basically, knock on any door that we want, but we have a reasonable cause to go and knock on this door. And that may be that sixth piece of the puzzle that we say, all right, there's something here.
And I think one of the other hesitations that people have is that when they report or they have a piece of information, is where do you report that to? And that confidence that it's actually going to go somewhere, and trusting that law enforcement is going to take that piece of information and act on it. And one of the things that we've discussed several times on Stop the Killing is that, the FBI tip line is international, and they have a process that it will get back to the local office, wherever it will get passed on. There are processes in place if you don't want to go to your local law enforcement. But don't just go to one place if you feel like you've got something. You can go to if it's a school, that, if it's a student, go to the school, go to your local pastor, your local church, your local mosque, your local wherever that this person is connected to, and give that information to as many people as you can. You don't have to just trust one tip line if that's your issue, but don't hold on to it.
Right. Right. As we begin to close up a little bit here, the last obvious question is, a tip or two on crime convention. And, I think the number one tip is follow your instincts. In fact, this is a little bit of a preview to the next episode. I had the pleasure of speaking to a couple of crime prevention experts from the Seattle Police Department. And that was kind of their number one tip is, trust your instincts. If you feel something's off, if you feel something's a little bit wrong, trust that may be the case and act accordingly. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to grab, a full on sword, but maybe that means that you need to call somebody. Maybe that means you need to cross the street.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, I think along the way, and then we get into those conversations, like you say, about the guns, and then the mental health. And, we've just recently done a really excellent episode that just solidifies all of the research on the correlation between mental illness and these mass shootings, and what the research tells. Actually quite shocking that it's really not impactful. 4%. I don't want to say the numbers because I know I'll get them wrong. But if you go back and listen to that episode, that is really full of great numbers that Catherine gives you. But the point is that something along the lines of 4% of those mass shootings have been diagnosed with a mental illness.
Yeah.
So 96% aren't. And how can we bring that number down, the 96%? And I think that's all those pieces of the puzzle, like, just making sure that we put some hurdles in place so that if somebody is intent on getting to the end game, which is a mass shooting of some description, they've got to jump some hurdles to get there. And some of them will trip on the way and they won't get to the end game.
Yeah.
And if we can put as many hurdles in the way as possible, then I think, who am I to say? I've got no experience in this, but logic would suggest that not everybody will get to the end.
Well, you're at least in hosting or co-hosting Stop the Killing, and you work with that. You're at least a junior expert by now.
I don't listen. I'm not as dumb as I used to be. That's where we'll go with that one.
You were never dumb, Sarah. maybe you were naive at times, like we all are, but you were never dumb. There's a difference. Interesting question. I think a lot of people, think that, mass shootings or mass killings, if you will, because sometimes people don't need just a gun to be able to do that, is an American problem. In your research, in your work on the podcast, do you see it in the UK? Do you see it in Saudi Arabia? Do you see it in these other countries? And does it take a different slant, or is it just still somebody, killing a mass group of people just in a different country?
Well, it's so funny nothing funny about that, but it's interesting that you say that because we do cover global mass shooting, or as you say, mass killing incidents on the podcast. So, for example, in season 3, we've got the Dunblane massacre in Scotland, for example. We've covered 2 from New Zealand, which is the grand total of all mass shootings in New Zealand, to be fair. But the point is that really since the whole social media has burst onto the scene, what we've found, and when I say we, I mean the FBI, not me, but what Catherine has found is that it's hatred without borders now, because the access to the internet is the Christchurch shooting in New Zealand, for example, inspired the Buffalo shooting in New York. Is it Buffalo, New York? I hope I got that right.
No, you got it. Buffalo, New York.
Yeah. Thank you. So like things like that. So the Christchurch shootings influencing the Buffalo shooting, the Buffalo shootings influencing, a shooting elsewhere across the pond somewhere else. And it's all just bouncing around the world. It's honestly hatred without borders. And it is not any longer a US contagion. Yeah. It's very much a global contagion, which is tragic.
Yeah, it is. And I think we'll kind of close, unless, here's a very good question. Other than the obvious, which we've already talked about, is that instinct. If you see something, report something. Is there another number one tip, or maybe a number 2 tip on what we should be looking for to lower the number of mass shootings, or the probability of mass shootings, whether it be here in the US or beyond?
I probably would say that's definitely more Catherine's remit. But one thing I would say is that if you ever do find yourself in that, make sure that run, hide, fight.
Yeah.
That's the next step. We can do everything to prevent it, but in that moment, if you're not prepared, then you set yourself up for disaster. So make yourself aware of run, hide, fight. Make sure that they're training it in your business, in your schools, in appropriate ways.
Yeah, that's an excellent piece of advice. I've talked to a number of self-defense experts, some that even train law enforcement and military. And I've said this before on the show. The number 1 tip that I always get is choose safety, which goes perfectly along with the run, hide, fight. Because if the mass shooting is starting all the way on the other side of the building, you have the opportunity to run. If you run and will be in full sight, then you probably need to hide. But that's your choose safety. But at other times, when that person is 3 feet away from you and you can't run or hide, the choose safety is you've got to fight for your life. So that's an unfortunate situation, or a reality that we have to live in our world today. As we wrap up here, for all the folks out there, that want to listen to your great podcast, number 1, obviously, Stop the Killing. Clueless, The Long Con, which we didn't talk much about, but I had the opportunity to listen to every single episode, and that's very, very rare for me. Listen to every episode. If you're a fan of American Greed, that is a great type of podcast, and there's an article on Podcast Magazine on that. Also, Conning the Con, and we didn't even talk about Guilty Green. For all of our law enforcement spouses out there, especially those moms and wives that are want to be a little bit more sustainable and green in their house, Guilty Greenie is a much more laid back podcast than Stop the Killing, and a lot of fun. I've also covered that. So for those folks that want to listen to a Sarah Ferris podcast out there, how best can they find them?
Well, they are available on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.
You've done this before.
Guess I have done. Not my first rodeo, but if you do want to find a place where you can find all of the different podcasts that I'm working on, you can go to my Instagram, which is @Conmunity, C-O-N, see what I did there? Conmunity Podcast.
Perfect. Sarah, it is always a pleasure to talk to you, whether it's on Podcast Magazine, we're talking about Guilty Greedy, we're talking about something heavy like Stop the Killing. You are always a joy to have a conversation with. Thank you for being on the show.
Ditto, Ken. Thanks so much for having me.
All my pleasure. And thank you to all of you who have either watched or listened to this episode of Public Safety Talk Radio. And we'll be back with you next week with another great guest.
Public Safety Talk Radio is produced by the POCUA. The POCUA is a consortium of financial institutions serving law enforcement as well as other first responders and public safety professionals. To learn more about our association and to find one of our credit unions or service providers near you, go to www.policecreditunions.com. And always remember, if you aren't working with one of our POCUA credit unions, you're just banking with an institution that just so happens to serve first responders. As a public safety professional, you and your family deserve better. Find a POCUA credit union today.